everybody, and welcome to The Power Is Now. My name is Eric Frazier. It's a beautiful day in Southern California, a great day to talk about real estate. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about real estate as it relates to the Fair Housing Act of 1968. In 2021, the Powers now embarked upon a journey to talk to industry leaders about the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And if you haven't watched it, please go to thepowersnow.com and you'll find the 2021 series. And so this is now a permanent signature series of The Power Is Now. And I'm really excited about this year's guest. And up with us today is Ryan Gorman. He's the CEO of Coldwell Banker. Now, we're going to be talking to Ryan about the 1968 Fair Housing Act, the importance of the act, what can we do to add, say, some teeth behind the act, and is fair housing a reality today? Before we bring on Ryan, let me share a little bit of his background. He is a chief executive officer of Coldwell Banker Real Estate LLC, a global industry leader with a 115-year legacy of unparalleled customer service, integrity, and technology innovation. Under Gorman's leadership and guidance, Coldwell Banker has blazed a forward-thinking path into the 21st century. Coldwell Banker has left a defining mark with its Project North Star rebrand, developed CBX listing technology powered by big data, empowered agents to build wealth and improve their quality of life with services such as listing concierge, powered with Angie to help consumers sell their houses 25% faster with Realogy, created RealSure with Home Partners of America to distress the home purchase and sales transaction for consumers, elevated and rebranded its global luxury brand, supported St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, and dedicated itself to diversity and inclusion, earning the Women of Choice Award and launching its inclusive ownership affiliate program. As CEO of Coldwell Banker, Gorman serves more than 100,000 affiliated agents, and has nearly 3,000 offices in approximately 4 countries, folks. And that's not all, there's even more. Ryan, welcome to The Power Is Now Fair Housing Series.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure to speak with you in general. And I feel like after that introduction, I should turn that around to you and try and introduce you and have you sit there while I praise you and talk about all of your incredible accomplishments, including, honestly, this series itself. So I'm glad to hear it has become a permanent installation within The Power Is Now. It's incredibly important. You've treated it so well, so thoughtfully. And it's not just a moment for you. It truly is a mission, which is impressive. So thank you for allowing me to join you.
Thank you, Ryan, for saying that, The Power Is Now as a media company is focused on education and information. We really want to empower people with the knowledge they need to build wealth in real estate, to acquire real estate, to manage real estate, but also to understand all the other things associated with real estate, like this particular law, the 1968 Fair Housing Act. And folks, if you didn't get a chance to watch or listen to Ryan last year, I encourage you to do so. I'm sure that he's going to share more today about the 1968 Fair Housing Act. But Ryan, I was so impressed with your presentation, the information you shared last year, that I'm really happy that you're coming back and to being a part of the series this year. And I wish you continued success with this mega company that you're running within the Realogy family of companies. It's really impressive. And you're a pretty young guy with all that responsibility. So I'm really impressed with what you've been able to accomplish with Coldwell Banker.
Well, now, kind of you. I appreciate it. And I should just note that is, I am privileged to serve the 100,000 plus, across 40 countries. I'm just a member of the team. So, it's, for me, it really is a pleasure every day to be able to serve and be inspired by those folks. So that I get to play a small role in this incredible legacy and history of this company is fantastic. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
One of my favorite sayings is teamwork makes the dream work,
That's
and
great.
Truly, you are the team leader. And I appreciate you saying that. I know your employees do, that it takes everyone working together. In fact, I heard this great quote the other day, Ryan. It says, if you could get everyone pulling in the same direction. That's what teamwork is.
Yeah.
That you can literally accomplish anything. Have you heard that statement?
It's so true. I've heard versions of that, and whether it's applied to athletics or life or political change or whatever it is, the concept of a spin on that sort of a small group of highly motivated people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. I mean, that concept of we truly can do anything. We truly can do anything, which is fantastic. Which gets back to the power is now. If you can do anything, then now's the time to do it.
The power is now. You're absolutely right. Well, Coldwell Banker is a mega real estate company. And I think you're the largest of the Realogy family of companies. And so I think it's important that Coldwell Banker, and I think you've embraced this, be a leader when it comes to dealing with the challenges, not just in the real estate business, the technology, the transaction itself. And I just read this, just all the things you guys are doing to make homeownership easier and more accessible. But if you could take a moment and just kind of speak to the mission of your organization and really what is the heart and soul of Coldwell Banker?
So for me, that the founding principles in 1906, the quick story in 1906 is the company was founded to truly bring integrity to the real estate transaction. So in San Francisco, after the earthquake and ensuing fires, there was a lot of misinformation, a lot of fraud taking place within the transaction space, within the real estate space. There wasn't clear who owned what, and there was a lot of people, frankly, just being taken advantage of. And so the concept of Coldwell Banker being founded on the three principles of honesty, integrity, and service continues to motivate me to this day. There's something about sort of the soul of an organization that is powerful and compelling. For me, that's what I always go back to. So different moments in time, there's been different areas of focus, but it's always been on that bedrock of honesty, integrity, and service. And the fact that I think it was the 11th year in a row now among the world's most ethical companies. We take that very seriously. There are a lot of accolades out there, and we're very fortunate to have many of them. Best places to work, best places to work for women, most diverse organizations. There are a lot of areas where we've been able to stand out. But for me, that integrity is the bedrock of everything, and that really is what powers the rest of the awards. Frankly, you don't get a chance to achieve them unless you really are building on that foundation.
What a great foundation. Honesty, integrity, and fairness, I believe, right? Those are the three.
Service, yeah, and fairness being a key part of that, for sure.
Yeah. So that would mean the Fair Housing Act in 1968, and it's I guess, celebration or consideration during the month of April is very important to Coldwell Banker. And the fact that you are appearing on this program for the second time in a row to talk about it speaks volumes to me on how committed you guys are to the ideals behind the 1968 Fair Housing Act. And so could you take a moment and just kind of share what your organization is doing as a company to promote fair housing and to address some of the issues of housing discrimination?
For sure. So you mentioned the sort of spirit of the law, something we talk about a lot. So the spirit and letter of the law and the Fair Housing Act is paramount among them. So the concept of integrity resonates with me, resonates with everyone. And if you're going to build upon a bedrock of integrity, then you need to live by not just the spirit of your rules or the rules in which you work, but the letter and the spirit, rather. For me, that's relatively crucial. So what we've done, and I should say, we've leaned in much harder over the past few years, in large part because of my and our realization of how much additional work needs to be done. And this work may never be done. I hope it will be, but for now, it is very clear how much work needs to be done. So we've asked for everyone to educate themselves. We've tried to work harder to be part of that solution by creating fair housing education that we made available not just to all of Coldwell Banker, and indeed required every employee of Coldwell Banker to take that every year, but we made it available to the entire industry. So private labeled it for others, for other organizations, for other entities that wanted to be able to put forth education for their members, but perhaps didn't have the wherewithal to develop it themselves. So that was the first step. We've included with that a fair housing pledge that we've asked everyone to take that ensures that I have taken the steps necessary to understand the Fair Housing Act and all that has ensued after that. And I will take the actions now based upon that knowledge to ensure that I am working to move that mission forward. In addition to that, we've also created a number of programs that try to get at the core of it. So for me, the ultimate report card of the Fair Housing Act is actually home ownership being pervasive. There is debate in some quarters as to whether or not home ownership is a pure good. There's no debate with me. I believe it absolutely can be the single most powerful force in generational wealth creation and the kind of financial stability that can be necessary for families to be able to invest as they see fit, whether it's in education or starting a company or whatever it might be. It's been the biggest differentiator in financial wherewithal in families generationally in this country for years. If indeed it is a good, then the ultimate report card is how pervasive is that good? How uniformly distributed is that good? And today it is not. So today, for instance, the home ownership rate of African Americans in this country is slightly lower than it was when the Fair Housing Act of 1968 was passed, which is you don't need to look any further to know whether or not we have work to do and significant work to do in that regard. There's a lot beyond that too. A lot of the programs that you mentioned are to facilitate homeownership, to actually be able to step into homeownership. We're going to be revealing some more great work with Realshore here related to FHA and VA buyers here at some point in time in the not too distant future. But there's a lot of core work underlying the facilitation of home ownership, making sure that awareness is high, and then the tools are there to execute. We'll probably talk a little bit about some of that, but there have been lots of tools created. The fact that home ownership has not moved in the direction that we need it to move means those tools have not been applied in the way that they should. And that's what we can be part of the solution for.
Ron, your point is well taken. Do we measure the success of the Fair Housing Act by the rate of homeownership of those who were supposed to benefit from the Fair Housing Act? I mean, the Fair Housing Act is addressing discrimination against women, against minorities, against just every aspect of it. Title VIII got into families. I mean, it's really an important piece of legislation, and measuring the success of it is the question. How do we know that it is working? And what are some of the acts? What are some of the things that companies can do, agents can do, those in the housing industry can do to make it a reality? And so I really appreciate the tools that you're creating for your agents, the requirement of education. Do you see an impact? Are you able to measure within your organization if you're making progress, maybe through less complaints or discrimination or greater diversity in the Asian population or the clientele that you're actually selling homes to or representing buyers?
You mentioned a lot of the great areas that we do try to measure. So number one would be awareness, right? So those individuals who have actually, for instance, taken the training, and the training it does focus on the Fair Housing Act itself, but we try and go well beyond that, right? Getting into areas such as unconscious bias, understanding of microaggressions, their facilitation and their impact, what actually is underlying some of the terms that people have heard about and oftentimes misunderstood, or candidly, people have intentionally misapplied for their own reasons at times. So trying to break down some of those myths. And then we move into, if we have the awareness and we can measure awareness by people who have actually participated in these programs, then what about the composition? So composition of our company and composition of the neighborhoods that we serve, right? So how diverse actually is that composition? Now we have a little bit of a challenge with our independent contractors out there who it's a self-identification approach to whether or not someone can let us know if they believe they're a member of different organizations or we can use as a proxy, or if they're a member of different groups, whether those are racial or ethnic, and a lot of other factors on which we measure. We've gotten a lot higher I'd say participation in self-identification there, which is terrific. So we can know what a baseline is on which to build and how diverse we actually are as an organization, how much we're reflecting the communities that we're serving, and then how much we're driving the composition of those communities as well by making opportunity available to everyone. So we focus on things like our Agents of Change program, which is a lot about awareness of the actual experiences of those around us, the experience of, for instance, an agent coming from an underrepresented group stepping into an organization where there are not a lot of agents who they feel like have had their similar lived experience, right? And what that actually means, what that feels like, and what we can do to change that. Things like our hiring practices. So for instance, a branch office manager will have a position open while we require a diverse slate is composed before we actually fill a position, right? So that means that we continue looking for candidates until we believe we've had a diverse set of candidates to actually interview for a position. And we've moved from approximately 2% external hiring, meaning typically we'd be hiring from our agent ranks internally in terms of that manager role. As when we put in this diverse slate requirement, as well as keeping the role open for longer, we had a 42% external hiring rate. Now, I'm not saying we don't want to hire internally. We absolutely do. However, if you believe that the composition of your organization does not reflect the communities you serve, then it will take generations for the diversity to actually evolve unless you're bringing in outside voices, outside individuals. And that's made a pretty significant impact for us as well. And then the last component that we're really relying upon pretty heavily at the moment is our inclusive ownership program on the franchise side. So I know you believe very strongly that real estate professionals can be a phenomenal resource for individuals who are considering homeownership. First of all, for even understanding that it is possible for them, that there are programs and pathways for them. The number of people who ask me to this day, do I need 20% down to be able to move, or do I need 25% because of contingencies and whatnot to be able to step? I mean, you absolutely do not yet. It's one of the most pervasive myths out there. If you don't have that, you're not even contemplating this as a potential for you or your family or your financial future. Real estate professionals, especially who are operating in the sphere, in the community of areas that are historically underserved, can help break down a number of those myths. So how are we inviting in those entrepreneurs into our brokerage, and how are we inviting them into our network, in terms of being principal brokers, owner operators of brokerages in these areas? So our inclusive ownership program brings them in, allows us to invest up to $100,000 in their brokerage, get them started. I personally work with them, mentor them. Other members of our company do as well, to help them to be able to be successful once they step in, but then also grow. And so we've had somewhere between 200 and 2,000% growth with the 24 firms that we brought into that program so far, which is, I don't know that we can necessarily replicate those numbers at all times in the future. It's been absolutely incredible, but that means to me that there's a big opportunity there, and it's been an underserved opportunity. And so I think all we're really doing is tapping into that. We share that message broadly because we hope all of our competitors say, well, I want that too. I want that opportunity for more at my organization too. I want to broaden my success too. I want to have those kinds of numbers to report. Great. There's nothing where we hope will be ripped off sooner by our competitors than our inclusive ownership programs. We've very liberally shared information, including behind the scenes, with those who are contemplating similar programs.
Ryan, I'm not sure if I know of a company that has such a comprehensive approach to addressing the needs for inclusiveness and diversity. And it's just, I think that you are definitely leading the conversation, leading the path for others to follow. And I tip my hat to you for the great work you're doing. We need leadership in banking. I've been in a mortgage banker for 40 years, and I've always been one or two, maybe at the most a handful of African Americans working in banking for 40 years. That's been my story. And I believe it's only because of the lack of leadership at the very top and making that reality a different experience. And also the lack of outreach, like you're doing with your program, trying to bring African Americans and people of color into banking. There are a few companies that are taking this approach similar to what you're doing, and they should be applauded and recognized for it. I wanted to ask you.
I appreciate that. And I don't mean to interrupt you, but I mean, it is very kind of you, but as I'm sure you can imagine, as soon as I hear words like that, it's humbling in the best way in terms of putting pressure on us to then have greater impact and greater results, because these are the actions that I'm describing. But what we want is results. We want to we are a large enough organization that we can be held accountable for really moving that homeownership needle. Truly, I know a lot of individuals think that they cannot. They can individually, but can I really move that? We're big enough where we really can have that impact. And on the lending side, I agree with you. We're working very hard there as well, and including me personally with recruiting in our lending division, guarantee rate affinity on our company-owned brokerage side. And that is an area where greater outreach for sure is needed. The talent is out there, but you need to be searching for talent in the places where the talent is, right? Which is a lesson that every company continues to learn, especially as the hiring environment is very tight. So if you're a technology organization, you're going to these campuses where the latest things are being taught, and you're trying to recruit there. If you want to diversify your ranks, you've got to be recruiting in areas where there are diverse and talented individuals. You can't just post where you've always posted. You can't go to the same, Mortgage Bankers Association events that you've always gone to, right? So you've got to be out there recruiting, and that's something we take very seriously as well.
Yeah, you got to go to more than just the Mortgage Bankers Association or the National Association of Realtors, conventions. There are other organizations that are just kind of born out of the issues of discrimination. That's why they exist. I mean, we can just start with the NAACP and their work to help bring about, along with Dr. Martin Luther King, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And then the 1968 Fair Housing Act, as a result of pressure and community involvement. And from those organizations came the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, the National, the area, what is it called? The Asian Real Estate Association of America. And now there's the Gay and Lesbian National Real Estate Association.
The Alliance,
The Alliance. And so there are many organizations. And perhaps maybe that is one measurement of the impact of the 1968 Fair Housing Act, needing organizations to represent the communities that have been underserved and are discriminated against. And so, does Coldwell Banker embrace these organizations and participate in their events, and do you buy into their mission of increasing homeownership in their respective communities?
Absolutely. So the inclusive ownership program I mentioned, we announced that at the NAREB conference in Las Vegas, in large part because the prior conference, they do a conference national or conference twice a year. The prior conference in Atlantic City that I had attended, the feedback that I had received there, much of it quite jarring, candidly, in terms of what needed to be done, is a big part of what drove my contemplation and our creation of the inclusive ownership program. So when we returned to the next conference to unveil there what our, what the result is, essentially what our commitment is going to be. And then it's been off to the races, since then. In terms of some of the other organizations that you mentioned, unfortunately, the Alliance, the LGBTQIA organization, had to cancel their first. It was going to be their first in-person meeting due to COVID. I was going to be attending and speaking at that. I look forward to the next one. For NAREP, their national conference was a week or two ago in Washington, D.C., which I attended. And then ARIA is having a conference, actually, where I'll be speaking on Wednesday. So we do try to pretty aggressively lean in. There are so many local organizations as well. I'm always so proud when I run into a Coldwell Banker leader who we have Coldwell Banker leaders who are on the boards of all those organizations. I think actually the person running the panel in 2 days at the RA conference is a Coldwell Banker agent as well. We have national board members at NAREP who were installed here most recently. So I'm always so proud when we're organizing both nationally as well as locally here. So unfortunately on Thursday, I'll be on the road, but I was just invited to the local NAREP chapter here in New Jersey to speak yesterday, and I'll be traveling, but the individual who invited me is a Coldwell Banker agent who's president of that local chapter. And so it really is the grassroots where things get done, but that national superstructure is what supports those who are working on the ground there to forward the mission.
Well, I'm happy to hear that because real estate agents really are driving the conversation with consumers. They are helping particularly minorities, make the dream of ownership a reality, instilling in them that it can be done. But they do need support to do that, from education to marketing support materials to financial support to reach out to the communities. It looks like you guys are doing that. You mentioned about 20% down. I think it was Urban Institute that did a study a few years ago, and that's still the number one, misinformation, if you will, that you need 20% down to buy a home, when in fact NAR put out a study, and I believe that the average is 7%, and that's using just traditional down payment first-time homebuyer programs, where it requires 3.5% down, maybe 3% in closing costs. So, but there's also down payment assistance programs that eliminate the down payment completely, where you just have to closing costs, and some even help with closing costs. So in June of last year, the Powers Now launched the African American Wealth Initiative, and within that are several other initiatives to bring attention to down payment assistance. across the country. In fact, for those of you watching, go to thepowersnow.com and you'll see the African American Wealth Initiative under the menu bar. And so there's a gap of knowledge here. There are many people that could buy. I mean, you guys could probably triple your goals if somehow if we got the word out that money is available, because that's still the number one barrier to home ownership.
It absolutely is. So the gap is widest where ownership is also lowest, right? So where in communities where home ownership is 75, 80, 85%, the gap is lower. In fact, many of those community surveys show that individuals think you may not need anything down, and that almost any credit, there's probably a program for you. Because credit's another challenge, right? Someone doesn't have a 750 credit score figures. Well, if I don't have 25% set aside and I don't have a 750 credit score, whereas in areas that have very high home ownership rate, I candidly have had a lot of these conversations with individuals who say, just because my credit is terrible and I have no money doesn't mean I shouldn't be able to own a home. The exact opposite is true in many communities where home ownership rates are 20, 30, 40%, where people think that they need essentially perfection in order to step onto that path of home ownership. Now, there are a lot of really good reasons for the skepticism that exists as well, right? So there are programs that have been created, some of which are frankly just scams that sound like whether they're credit repair scams or down payment assistance scams, or people really do get burned, or there have been programs that are ostensibly created for communities that they ended up really providing a disservice to. So if we look back at like the history of, for instance, FHA Section 235, there was a time where some of these programs seemed almost designed to keep communities homogeneous, to keep segregation strong, essentially, to further what was redlining once redlining became illegal. And in many cases, there were people who were not financially qualified to step into home ownership. Candidly, we're having a difficult time being financially qualified to rent, but were put into homes that were dilapidated at best. It'd probably be a compliment to call them dilapidated, but stepped into the FHA 235 home programs with no money down, and then found themselves foreclosed upon that shortly thereafter. I mean, and our industry, unfortunately, was complicit in many of these, in flipping homes to individuals who, out of desperation, had no other choice. Buying a home for one price and selling it for 50 to 100% more within days, in some cases within minutes, to someone participating in that program, only to have that home foreclosed upon a year and a half later. Now, with a legacy like that, it's no wonder that there's not only misinformation, but also deep skepticism, which is why I personally believe having real estate professionals in some of these communities that have historically had low home ownership rates is one of the most powerful things we can possibly do. Right. So that someone who's built a trusted relationship, not based upon a transaction, but based upon just lived experience as a member of a community, can then convey some of that trust when saying, I can actually help ensure that you will not step on a landmine. You will not move into one of these programs that are, frankly, a ripoff, but you will actually be able to step on a path to home ownership that you will be able to sustain.
Ryan, in addition to, working with people who know on a very intimate level, having, grew up in their neighborhood or be African-American, Latino, or of some other gender or sexual orientation, they know firsthand the experiences of that develop fear of even going into a bank or talking to someone about a loan, or the buying into the information out there because it's intuitively, it feels like it's true because of the history, the long history of racism and discrimination. But I think it also takes individuals born in those communities, coming out into the real estate business, into the lending business, and we have to reach out to get them in. But it also takes individuals like you who sit at the helm of very large organizations that are well financed, that have the capacity to actually implement change, to make change happen. Because there are so many, I would say, leaders who simply don't see a problem. There are many people who really believe that we don't even need a Fair Housing Act. And before I let you respond to that question, we're going to take a quick break. For those of you just tuning in, you're listening to The Power is Now. and Ryan Gorman, the CEO of Coldwell Banker. We are celebrating the 1968 Fair Housing Act, and we are analyzing it. We're talking about it. And this is a series of The Power Is Now. Please stay tuned. We're in the home stretch with Ryan Gorman, talking about the 1968 Fair Housing Act. We'll be right back right after this commercial break.
The Power Is Now magazines are the leading resource for real estate agents, mortgage bankers, entrepreneurs, and small home ownership businesses, providing leaders with business strategy information, resources, and tools through PIN, real estate, programming guide magazines. Stay up to the minute with real estate news and information from industry experts. Subscription is free. Sign up today. thepowerisnow.com. thepowerisnow.com.
And we're back. For those of you just joining us, welcome to the Power Is Now Fair Housing Series. My name is Eric Frazier. In addition to being the host of The Power Is Now, I'm also a vice president and mortgage advisor with First Bank. My license number is 461807. The views and opinions that I express on this show are my own. They do not necessarily reflect that of First Bank. We're talking about fair housing, the importance of fair housing, and what companies are doing. In this particular case, what Coldwell Banker is doing to make a difference, to make it the Fair Housing Act of 1968 live up to it's the dreams of the writers, of those who helped bring it to a reality. And of course, in honoring the death of Martin Luther King, which many believe was the catalyst to it being signed into law. And so I'm really thankful that Ryan Gorman has taken the time out of his extremely busy schedule to join us and to share his thoughts and to share what the Coldwell Banker organization is doing. And I don't know about you, but if you're a real estate professional or a mortgage professional, you have to be impressed with Coldwell Banker and with Ryan Gorman. Again, Ryan, thank you so much for being with us today and for participating in this series.
Entirely my pleasure. I appreciate that, and like I said before, that is humbling, and we have so much work. What we see is the work before us, right? And that's what we need to be focused on. And we need 1,000 more voices saying the same things, and frankly, we need 1,000 more voices holding us accountable to the results that we're talking about.
Many people believe, Ryan, that the Fair Housing Act is just another piece of liberal legislation that we don't really need it. In fact, the same individuals who say this about the Fair Housing Act also say that we don't need a National Association of Real Estate Brokers, an Asian Real Estate Association America, and a National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. We don't need a Gay and Lesbian National Association, Realtor Association. We don't need these. We don't need this fragmented group. We don't need laws that cater to particular social issues in our community. And what do you say to that?
I can understand. Certainly, when we launched our inclusive ownership program, I heard a lot of that kind of feedback. A lot of people reaching out with some constructive criticism, I'd say, of our participation. And in many cases, as I've said before, I engaged with 100% of the people who reached out after that announcement. And when I did, I found a remarkably high percentage of individuals who had such a different lived experience that when I shared sort of why we were doing what we're doing, their response more often than not was, I still don't completely agree with you, but I understand it now. In fact, one of the most, I'd say, strident voices that came after me when we announced very aggressively, with a view of a sort of no one ever gave me anything. The concept of, oftentimes I've heard the expression, born on third and thought I hit a triple. It was kind of that kind of, mindset that was coming at me. That individual has since referred people to the program. Now, one of the things that they share with me is that they happen to live in a very rural area. They had literally never encountered a Black real estate professional. Now, they live in an area with, I want to say, 1 or 2% African-American population. So perhaps not shocking that they had not encountered someone who had had some of the experiences that I was outlining to them. When they heard about that, then they had referred, individuals, potential owners to us. I mention that because I need to leave space for the understanding that, like, if you're like me, for instance, right? So I am I'm a Caucasian male. I'm cisgendered. I'm physically able-bodied. I'm athletic. I even happen to be tall. I've got a 4-year college degree. Uh, all the boxes of privilege that you could possibly imagine. Now, if you're me growing up, especially if you, I've moved dozens of times. I've lived in lots of different places. But if you've lived in one place and you have this view that I've worked for whatever I've gotten. I've never needed what other people say they might need. If that's your lived experience, it can be very difficult to even comprehend how anyone else, especially if you think that you're not discriminating against someone else, and you think that most of the people who surround you are not discriminating or engaging in racist views. If you're not particularly educated on unconscious bias, on microaggressions, and some of the history, frankly, the history itself is being attacked today oftentimes as, why do we need that? Why do we need to understand a time of greater strife? And I think this has always been true. It's true today. It will continue to be true perhaps forever, but we can work to change the results. There was a Supreme Court case in the mid 1800s where the Chief Justice declared, now that slavery has been ended for dozens of years, and African Americans at the time, that's not the term that was used, are co-equal with their white counterparts, we no longer need any of this legislation. Now imagine, of course, in the mid 1800s, anyone thinking that there was co-equal, and you understand today why someone would perhaps think that. So you can understand why people think that we don't need these things if they've never had these kinds of experiences, and that's why it's so important to lift up, whether it's our Agents of Change initiative, which really has people openly sharing in a way of a high trust environment, a high safety environment, in ways that have just changed people's lives and views. We've gotten that feedback constantly, people saying, I had no idea. I've worked with someone for years, decades perhaps, then to hear them share their lived experience in that way, in that moment of safety and vulnerability, I had no idea they were going through that. I had no idea that they had experienced those things. I'm enraged and empathetic all at the same time, and now I'm more engaged than ever in this work that we're doing. That's the kinds of things that really open this up. But the concept of do we need it? We absolutely need it. Do we truly have fair and open housing in this country? We absolutely do not. You need to look not farther than just raw statistics, objective statistics at showing the actual diversity of communities and the home ownership rate by ethnicity, by LGBTQ status, by even veteran status, right? Something that we laud in this country, and yet veterans, as you know, as a lending professional in the VA program, it is very, even though programs have been designed for veterans, they're not able to take advantage of them. They're not even aware of them in many cases as much as they should be. And their home ownership rate and their success in home ownership isn't anywhere near what it should be. So we can check boxes. We can say we've got programs. We can say we've passed laws. But the proof is in the pudding, and ultimately those statistics are the report card.
In your inclusion program and this agent where everyone's being transparent, learning everyone's story, actually working with people of different nationalities, organizations, color, what have you. I think that is ultimately the solution to coming together, and not just coming together, but decreasing discrimination and across the board. I wanted to ask you, obviously, given your stature, your nature, your ethnicity, you probably have not personally experienced discrimination, but and maybe correct me if I'm wrong. But
no, I think you're right. I don't think I have. Nothing that could actually be called discrimination. I don't think I have. Now, one thing that was a revelation with the Newsday investigation on Long Island into housing discrimination a couple of years ago was that many individuals who are experiencing discrimination don't know that they're experiencing discrimination. Many of the testers shared that they had no idea. They thought they were having a really great experience with a real estate professional or a lending professional. They thought they were seeing all the homes available. They thought that their questions were being answered in the same way that anyone else's questions were being. They really had no idea until they saw the tape and saw the data that they were. So while I don't think I've been discriminated against, and I can't possibly claim to, it is important to acknowledge that most discrimination is not the person who's being discriminated against is not aware in this case.
Right. It's not overt, right?
Right.
And because of the lack of, I would say, knowledge or having any legacy of homeownership in their family, So not knowing what the experience should be, they don't know they're being steered into, particular communities where, you're prevented from going to other communities, better areas, what have you. The other thing too is that I believe this lack of integration within our industry, within real estate and within mortgage banking, is just a kind of a mirror of the lack of integration in society. And so a good example would be the fact that, we have NAREP, we have ARIA, we have NAREP, we have now the LGBTQ community associations, yet you don't see the participation of these individual groups in each of the other individual groups. Like, for example, how many African Americans go to the ARIA convention and how many ARIA agents go to the NAREP convention. And what you see is silos being built. And so it's like a whole nother form of racism or discrimination that's being developed due to the lack of collaboration and integration and desire to do business with one another. And so when you're not in communication or relationship with other people, you then create these concepts about them, you buy into the stereotypes about them. And so you don't do business with them, you don't sell to them, you don't hire them. You see where we're going with this?
Yeah, I mean, if frankly, it's the one of the things I think of is hallway conversation. So I'll share, very heartened to see some cross-pollination in really important ways recently. So for instance, the leadership of the various groups that were just mentioned really seem to go out of their way at this point to attend the conferences, now that we're back in person, to attend the conferences of the other groups. So for instance, I was in Washington, D.C. at the NAREP conference, the Hispanic Real Estate Professional Conference, and literally in the hallway ran into a leadership team member from the ARIA conference who said, "Oh, would you mind coming to our event, which I'm now going to be attending later this week as well?" That literal hallway conversation, that sort of proximity, means that the leadership of Coldwell Banker was there.
Right.
The leadership of NAREP was there, and the leadership of ARIA was there, and there's mutual support. We see that now on the our employee resource group organizations, as well as our diversity and inclusion councils. I didn't mention that, but we have diversity and inclusion councils set up across the country now within Coldwell Banker. What we very consistently see is a leadership of those organizations going out of their way to support these other organizations that are more focused on one specific area. And it's had such a fantastic impact, not only cross-pollination of ideas, but also just the visual support of seeing that you are seeing, members of NAREB showing up at the ARIA conference. And candidly, one of the things that goes a long way is the leadership of the organization holding the event, inviting them in. Right. So it can be a massively uncomfortable thing to attend an event for an organization for candidly people who don't look like you. Right. And you're showing up. And is that appropriate? Is that inappropriate? Is that an imposition? But when you're feeling invited, when you're feeling welcome, when you're feeling introduced to other individuals there, and suddenly by the time lunch hour evolves, you've got 100 new friends, you've got 10 new events on your calendar that you're going to be attending, you've got 15 new ideas in your notepad that you're going to be taking back to you. It changes the world in these brief moments, and that's what I've been encouraged to see a lot more of.
You're absolutely right, and you're right in that the leadership, I think, historically, since the beginning of these organizations, you will find the leaders of the organizations attending the conferences. And I think to show that support is important, and also to mirror the example for their respective members is important. But the reality is, it's just the leaders as a percentage. Often. Very few actual members attend these conferences. And I'm a witness to this. And I think this is not helping solve the problem. And that, which leads me to the next question, racism is taught, right? I mean, you're either from your family or your neighborhood. It's taught. You're not born a racist. You're not born not wanting to do business with somebody. Someone somehow put that into your psyche, and now you behave and act this way. Do you feel that discrimination, especially after the Newsday event, which I think was a game changer, created a lot of additional training, and at least it brought attention to the types of discrimination that's taking place. But do you still think that racism is really driven by real estate, or do you believe that it's driven by real estate professionals?
Well, racism itself, right? It can be overt and the worst examples that come to mind are sometimes what people think about when they think of racism. But racism itself is essentially utilizing bias, utilizing what you think is information on which you can rely to be able to make decisions. Now, again, the most horrendous and ugliest versions of that are oftentimes what people think of. But in the Newsday investigation, we saw firsthand, for instance, footage of real estate agents who did not think that they were doing anything wrong, definitely did not think of themselves as racist, did not think that they were doing a disservice to their client. If anything, thought they were doing a service to their client. They made assumptions based upon the client, maybe what the client told them, or maybe how the client looked, about where the client would be happiest living, right? Those assumptions, in many cases, were racist assumptions. The individuals did not describe it that way, but in fact, that they would maybe assume that, well, since I don't know members of your race who are in this community, I'm going to assume that you might not be comfortable there because perhaps I would not be comfortable living in an area where nobody looked like me, right? So they're perhaps projecting and then applying those rules. That is unconscious bias. That is one of the things that we try to lift up to teach. So in every profession, this is true today. In real estate, we have both overt discrimination. I wish we didn't, but we do. And we have unconscious bias driving activities that result in a furtherance of segregation in many cases, or limiting opportunities in many cases. And that's why I think things like not just the fair housing understanding of the letter and the spirit of law, but then also things like our agents of change events are so important, because it changes the paradigm. It changes the openness to conversation. It helps people to open up and actually speak about, well, I realize now that I was about to do this thing, but that's me projecting. That's me making assumptions about what you may want. So let me give you all of the information. Now, one of the things that's true is people are very easily overwhelmed by a ton of information. So I don't care whether you're trying to pick a home or trying to pick toothpaste, right? You've got a million options, so much information, so much. So what a real estate professional can do is just have that dialogue, have that open dialogue, and say, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of choices. You could live. It's like when someone says, I want to live on Long Island. Well, it's a big island, big traffic patterns. What do let's try and narrow that down. Let me participate with you. Let me try and make as few assumptions as possible and extract as many, answers from you as possible. Now, when you think about that experience, that's a truly great customer service experience. Much like us holding an open slate until we have diverse candidates for a role, the net result is we're just hiring better people, right? We are hiring better people because we're opening the aperture. Same thing if you're really asking more questions and making fewer assumptions, you're delivering a better customer service experience. So yes, I absolutely think that we are seeing racist outcomes today in our activities. And I think that can be changed by improving our customer service experience overall.
Yeah, I agree. One thing that technology, though, has done is it's empowered the consumer to, basically practice real estate and investors as well, forming hedge funds and real estate investment companies and buying directly from consumers and consumers being empowered through for sell by owners and all these other platforms out there where you can list your home for $50 and sell it on your own. My fear now is that if racism and discrimination is so prevalent among realtors, as Newsday has pointed out, and as evidence has shown, which is why the situation that exists today, it's rooted in racism. I'm concerned that for sell by owners, consumers being able to sell their homes directly and not having training, not being licensed, not being even familiar with the laws, I feel that they're at risk of continuing this a different kind of discrimination that can't be even really managed or seen.
Unseen for sure, and if it's unseen, then it's extremely difficult to manage, right? So these are individuals who are not familiar with the law. They may make, even if they are intimately familiar with unconscious bias, for instance, they may still make certain assumptions that actually do violate the law and do perpetuate some of the kinds of segregation that we see in housing today. For instance, even a simple thing such as answering a question about the community. Well, what's the community like? What is the composition of that area? You can get yourself into trouble with the law very quickly in terms of fair housing by answering some of those questions, even if you think that it's coming from a really, really good place. And the fact that the law bans certain kinds of answers on that, it's not a peculiarity of the law. It's not a mistake. It's for a purpose, because your answers can just perpetuate the very lack of diversity in the composition of the community that we're trying to address, right? So when you do describe what exists today, you perpetuate what exists today. You set an expectation that if what exists today is what you want, then you come here, and if it's not, then you don't, right? Then you actually do continue to perpetuate that. So I agree with you. The lack of training, lack of understanding can be quite dangerous. And candidly, that we need to overcorrect in a pretty significant way if we want to have a different outcome than we have today.
Yeah, I agree. I know we can't legislate, we can't make it illegal for a consumer to sell their own property. Wouldn't that be great for our industry, right? But I think that there needs to be legislation that will require anyone selling their own home to get some type of training, certificate training sponsored by the state. It could be online, it could be what have you, where they are trained and they are familiar with the law. I think that should be, I'm not sure why it doesn't exist. If I had the time and resources, I would sponsor the bill myself here in California, and it should be going across the nation, that anyone selling real estate on their own has to receive a certificate of some type that will require at least 20 hours of training, what we have to go through as real estate professionals, so that they so that they're not violating the law. Now, it's not going to prevent them from violating the law if they want to do that, but at least
it starts
now,
with awareness, though.
Yeah, it brings awareness, and there could be some type of registration involved, so we know we can follow up on the outcome. If there is a complaint made, they'll see, okay, this person, I mean, I think things can be done, because, as you know, this whole for sale by owner community is getting larger and larger, and a lot of people, because of technology, are taking it on their own.
A lot of people certainly start there, right? They start attempting. So in terms of actual closings, the percentage ends up being relatively low, but it's in part because then they're educated by the process of, wait a second, I'm encountering things that I did not understand were going to be problematic. And now I understand why it actually is. And that I've never heard a proposal precisely like what you just outlined, but I think that's a very good one.
Well, we'll see. I'm going to share this with all the industry leaders, and maybe something will happen in regard to this. But I think knowledge is power, right? And so education is truly the driver of most change. Ryan, we have come to the end of this series, and you've devoted a whole hour with me today. I really appreciate your time. There is just one more question I want to ask you, and perhaps you can put this in the context of our traditional question, and that is, what does the powers now mean to you? But what does it mean to you in the context of fair housing? How can we give the Fair Housing Law, the 1968 Fair Housing Act, more teeth, more power? And how can we truly embrace this as a community of real estate professionals and mortgage professionals to really uphold the values that I believe are, if not written, unwritten in the law?
Well, it's a great question. I think it brings to mind for me the expression, the best time to plant a tree is 40 years ago, and the second best time is today. And I feel like that is what I think of when I think of the power is now. So the moment is now, the power is now. The power is in urgency, creating a sense of urgency, and then acting with urgency. I think the most powerful thing we could do with regard to making the spirit of the Fair Housing Act come alive is holding ourselves accountable, not to adherence with the law, but the outcome of homeownership for historically underserved areas. So if we really use that as the report card of the law, right now, the people who are saying, do we really still need the law? Is there really that kind of discrimination? Wouldn't be saying that, because they'd be looking at the actual results of, for instance, African-American homeownership rates in this country being slightly lower than they were at the passage of the time of the act, and dramatically lower than historically well-served populations. If that's the report card that we all hold ourselves accountable to, then we will not rest until we get A's. We will not rest until we achieve our goals with regard to that. As opposed to compliance with the law, it's compliance with the mission. And that's what I would very much like to see.
Ryan Gorman, CEO of Coldwell Banker. Thank you so much for your time today. For those of you who are watching, please share this video. Ryan has really just inspired me, and I hope he's inspired you by his comments and by the great work that Coldwell Banker is doing. If you're looking into getting into real estate, you might want to consider working for Coldwell Banker. They really have it going on. Thank you again for watching. Remember, we are at our best and we maximize our success when we act now. The power is now.